The morning was cool and quiet when Mark Delaney pulled into the small diner at the corner of Maple Street. It was the kind of place that smelled like coffee and pancakes from the moment you stepped out of your car. The sign above the door read Sonny's Diner, and for years, it had been one of Mark's favorite stops during his weekly drives into town. Mark was a retired Army veteran, a man in his mid-50s with steady eyes and a calm voice. He had served for over 20 years and had seen more than most people could imagine. After an accident during a mission overseas, he lost part of his leg. Since then, his service dog Scout had been his constant companion. Scout was a golden Labrador, trained to help him with balance and daily tasks, but more than that, the dog was his best friend. As Mark parked his truck and opened the door, Scout waited patiently. The pair had their routine. Mark would grab his cane, give Scout a light pat on the head, and together they'd head inside. It was something they'd done dozens of times before, always greeted with smiles and small talk from the regular staff. But that day, something felt different. There was a new manager behind the counter, a young man who looked too busy to notice anything around him. Mark didn't think much of it at first. He smiled, nodded politely, and took his usual seat near the window. Scout quietly lay down beside him, his vest clearly marked, "Service Dog, Do Not Disturb." Mark glanced around the diner. A few families were eating breakfast, and an elderly couple shared a pot of coffee near the corner booth. The smell of sizzling bacon filled the air. For a moment, everything felt peaceful. Then the manager walked over, his expression sharp and unwelcoming. "Sir," he said firmly, pointing at Scout, "you can't have that dog in here." Mark looked up, a little surprised. "Oh, he's a service dog," he explained politely. "He's trained to help me with mobility." The manager frowned. "Doesn't matter. Health code rules say no animals allowed. You'll have to take him outside." A quiet stillness spread through the diner. A few people turned to look. One woman even whispered to her husband. Mark kept his tone calm. "Sir, with all respect, that's not how it works. The law allows service animals inside with their handlers. Scout is trained and certified. He doesn't bother anyone." But the manager wasn't listening. He crossed his arms. "Look, I don't want to argue. Either the dog goes or you go." The word stung more than Mark expected. He had faced much harder things in life, but this was something different. It wasn't about rules or coffee or pie. It was about respect. He had worn the uniform for decades, served in places most people couldn't even find on a map. And now, here in his own hometown, he was being told to leave a diner because of the one thing that helped him live a normal life. He took a slow breath and looked down at Scout, who was watching him with calm, trusting eyes. "It's all right, boy," Mark whispered. "We'll go." Without a word, he stood up, grabbed his cane, and turned toward the door. The other customers stayed silent. A few looked guilty, others confused, but no one said a thing. The bell above the door jingled softly as Mark walked out into the parking lot. Outside, the cold air felt heavier. Mark paused beside his truck, steadying himself before climbing in. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He just sat there for a long moment, looking at the small-town diner that suddenly felt like a stranger. He thought about all the times he had eaten there before. The old waitress named Mary who used to refill his coffee before he even asked. The cook who once gave Scout a tiny piece of bacon as a treat. They were good people. But now, with one new manager and one thoughtless moment, the place felt completely changed. As he started the engine, Mark noticed a young woman standing near the window, holding her phone. She had recorded the exchange quietly, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. She didn't say anything to Mark, but she gave a small nod as if to say, "I saw what happened." Mark nodded back and drove away. That night, he didn't tell anyone what happened. He made a simple dinner at home, fed Scout, and sat in his small living room with the television on but barely watching. He tried to brush it off, but the moment kept replaying in his mind. The manager's cold tone, the quiet stares from the people inside. He wasn't angry for himself. He was sad for what it said about kindness. He had always believed that respect wasn't something you had to earn again and again. Once you gave part of your life for your country, people would simply understand. But that day proved otherwise. Meanwhile, the young woman who filmed the scene posted the video online with a short caption. "This man is a veteran. He was just kicked out of a diner because of his service dog." Within hours, the video began to spread. It started with a few shares among local veteran groups. Then it reached a few military pages. People commented with outrage, support, and empathy. Some shared their own experiences, saying they'd faced similar treatment. By midnight, hundreds of comments appeared under the video. "Unbelievable," one person wrote. "This man deserves respect, not rejection," another said. And then someone else tagged a name that would change everything. Commander Jack Nolan, a former Navy SEAL who had once served alongside Mark overseas. When Jack saw the video, he froze. The man in the clip, the quiet, polite veteran with the service dog, wasn't just anyone. He was the same soldier who had once saved Jack's life during an ambush years ago. Jack stared at the screen, remembering that dusty battlefield, the sound of chaos, and how Mark had pulled him to safety without hesitation. Seeing his friend treated that way lit a fire in him, but not of anger, of loyalty. He called a few of his former teammates, other veterans who remembered Mark too. By the time the sun began to rise the next morning, plans were already being made. Mark, however, had no idea. He woke up early, as he always did, fed Scout, and prepared for another quiet day. He didn't know that the simple act of walking out of that diner had started something far bigger than he could ever imagine. Somewhere out there, a group of Navy SEALs and veterans were planning to make sure that the world didn't forget who Mark Delaney was, or what he stood for. The next morning, the sun rose gently over Maple Street, washing the small town in shades of gold. The diner looked the same from the outside. Its neon sign flickered. The smell of coffee drifted out through the door. But something different was coming. Mark Delaney didn't know that his story had traveled overnight. He didn't know hundreds of people had seen the video of him being turned away, or that dozens of veterans had shared it with words like, "This isn't right," and "He deserves better." He woke up early, made himself a cup of black coffee, and watched Scout stretch and yawn near the kitchen door. To him, it was just another quiet morning, but for Commander Jack Nolan, it was not. Jack had been up since dawn, staring at the video again and again. The moment he saw Mark's face, memories came flooding back. The time Mark had carried him out of danger. The way he always stayed calm no matter what chaos surrounded them. To Jack, Mark wasn't just another veteran. He was a brother. He sent a message to a few of his old Navy SEAL teammates. Within an hour, replies started rolling in. They didn't need much explanation. One message said, "When do we meet?" Another read, "Tell me where to be." By 10 a.m., the quiet parking lot in front of Sonny's Diner began to fill with vehicles. Not just cars, but black SUVs, pickup trucks, and motorcycles lined up one after another. The engines hummed softly, and one by one, men and women stepped out, each wearing something that told their story. A jacket with a unit patch, a cap with faded insignia, a bracelet engraved with a date and a name. They didn't come with anger. They came with respect. Inside the diner, the staff began to notice. The new manager, the same man who had told Mark to leave the day before, looked out the window and frowned. "What's going on out there?" he asked, half joking. The waitress, an older woman named Mary who had known Mark for years, peeked outside and froze. "Those are veterans," she whispered. "A lot of them." Within minutes, every seat inside the diner was taken. The veterans didn't say much. They ordered breakfast politely, pancakes, eggs, coffee, and tipped generously. The atmosphere was calm but powerful. It was as if the room carried an unspoken message. We don't forget our own. Commander Jack Nolan sat at a corner table near the window. He wore a plain blue shirt and jeans, but there was no mistaking the quiet authority in his presence. After finishing his coffee, he stood up and walked toward the counter. The manager looked nervous. "Are you the one in charge here?" Jack asked, his tone steady but not harsh. The manager nodded. "Yes, sir. Can I help you?" Jack placed a hand on the counter and leaned forward slightly. "Yesterday, one of your customers, a veteran named Mark Delaney, was refused service here because of his service dog." The manager's eyes darted around. "I didn't know he was a veteran," he stammered. "It was just about the dog." Jack raised a hand gently. "You don't need to explain. What's done is done. But here's the thing. That man you turned away, he's the reason a few of us are still alive today." The diner went completely silent. Even the sound of sizzling bacon from the kitchen seemed to fade away. Jack continued. "He lost his leg saving others. He's one of the kindest, most humble people you'll ever meet, and all he wanted was a cup of coffee and a slice of pie." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Jack smiled, a soft but firm expression. We didn't come here to cause trouble. We came to remind people what respect looks like. Behind him, dozens of veterans nodded quietly. Some had tears in their eyes. Others simply looked proud. The manager's face softened. His voice trembled a little when he said, I didn't realize. I really didn't. I'm sorry, Jack nodded. Then let's make it right. Not with words, but with actions. When the group finished eating, they paid for their meals, and every single one of them left a large tip. Some even handed extra cash to Mary, the waitress, telling her to use it for anyone who couldn't afford a meal. The kindness in the air was undeniable. Outside, more veterans had gathered in the parking lot. Some leaned against their trucks, others stood talking quietly. A few local people passing by stopped to ask what was happening. When they learned the story, they stayed too. The parking lot began to fill, not with noise or protest, but with unity. The sound of laughter mixed with the low rumble of engines. Old friends greeted each other with handshakes and pats on the back. It wasn't a protest. It was a reunion of respect. News spread fast. By early afternoon, a few local reporters arrived. They took photos, asked questions, and tried to understand how something so small, one man being turned away, had become something so big and powerful. When one reporter asked Jack what the gathering meant, he answered simply, It means we don't forget those who served. We stand for each other. Always. Meanwhile, from his small house across town, Mark had no idea what was happening. He was fixing a loose screw on his prosthetic leg when his phone began to buzz repeatedly. He saw messages from old friends all saying the same thing. Turn on the news. When he did, he couldn't believe his eyes. The screen showed his favorite diner's parking lot, filled with veterans. Commander Jack Nolan stood in front of a group of them, speaking calmly to the camera. The caption read, Veterans gathered to support disabled soldier refused service. Mark felt his chest tighten. He didn't expect this. He never wanted attention or sympathy. But seeing those familiar faces standing together, men and women he once served with, filled him with a deep, quiet pride. He whispered softly, You didn't have to do that, Jack. Scout wagged his tail as if he understood. At that moment, something in Mark's heart shifted. The sting of the day before began to fade, replaced by a sense of gratitude. Not because the world was watching, but because he realized something beautiful. Loyalty doesn't end when the uniform comes off. Back at the diner, the crowd began to thin. Veterans shook hands with locals, promised to come back, and made sure everyone knew what the day was about. Before leaving, Jack turned to the manager once more and said, Make this place better. That's all he would ever want. The manager nodded, his eyes lowered in sincere regret. I will. As the last SUV pulled out of the parking lot, the sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long golden rays over the diner. What had started as a moment of disrespect had turned into a day of honor, one that no one in that small town would ever forget. Mark didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The lesson, the kindness, and the unity that started here were about to ripple far beyond Maple Street. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the trees, the quiet town of Maple Street buzzed with a story that no one could stop talking about. The news about the veterans gathering at Sonny's Diner had spread everywhere, from local newspapers to social media pages across the country. People were amazed. Some called it an act of loyalty, others called it a lesson in respect. But for most, it was a moment that touched their hearts. At home, Mark Delaney sat on his porch, a warm cup of coffee in hand, and his faithful dog, Scout, lying at his feet. The air smelled of rain, and the world seemed a little softer than usual. His phone had been ringing nonstop. Calls from strangers, messages from fellow veterans, even kind words from people he had never met. He didn't feel angry anymore. He felt thankful, not because his story had gone viral, but because it reminded people that kindness still mattered. Later that night, there was a knock on his door. When he opened it, Commander Jack Nolan stood there smiling warmly. You didn't think we'd do all that without coming to see you, did you? Jack said with a grin. Mark laughed and shook his head. You didn't have to do any of it. I would have been fine. Jack stepped inside, removing his cap. You might have been fine, Mark. But sometimes people need a reminder. What happened to you wasn't right, and we couldn't just stay quiet. The two men sat down in the small living room, drinking coffee and talking like old friends. Scout Scout lay between them, his tail gently wagging. "You know," Jack said after a moment, "the owner of the diner wants to meet you. He wasn't even there that day." "He's been trying to reach out." Mark looked surprised. "Really?" "Yeah," Jack nodded. "He said he didn't know what his manager did until the video came out. He's embarrassed, and he wants to make things right." Mark thought for a moment, then smiled softly. "All right, let's meet him, but I don't want anger or shouting. I just want to talk." The next morning, the two men arrived at Sonny's diner together. As they walked in, the bell above the door jingled just like it always had. The same manager who had turned Mark away was there, standing nervously by the counter, and beside him was the diner's owner, an older man with kind eyes and a humble posture. As soon as Mark entered, the owner stepped forward. "Mr. Delaney," he said sincerely, "I want to start by saying I'm deeply sorry. What happened to you was wrong, and it doesn't reflect who we are or what we stand for." Mark nodded politely. "Thank you. I appreciate that," the owner continued. "When I saw the video, I couldn't believe it. This diner has always been a place for everyone, families, travelers, veterans. I promise you we're going to fix this. I've already spoken with my staff about training, and we'll be putting up signs welcoming all veterans and service animals." Mark's expression softened. "That means a lot," he said quietly. Then, after a pause, he added, "But I have one more idea, something that could turn this place into something even better." The owner leaned forward curiously. "What's that?" Mark smiled. "How about once a month this diner hosts a Veterans Breakfast Day? Free meals for veterans and their families. It doesn't have to be fancy, just a chance for people to come together, share stories, and remind each other that respect still exists." The owner's eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea," he said immediately. "Let's do it. We'll even name it after you, the Delaney Veterans Breakfast." Mark chuckled. "That's not necessary. I just want to make sure no one else ever feels unwelcome like that again." The owner extended his hand. "Deal." Word about the new event spread quickly. By the following month, the diner was decorated with small American flags, photos of local veterans, and a banner that read, "Welcome Heroes. Veterans eat free today." People from all over the county came. Some were older veterans in wheelchairs, some were young soldiers recently back home, and some were families who had lost loved ones but came to honor them. The diner, once known for a moment of shame, was now filled with laughter, warmth, and unity. Mark sat by the window, the same seat he had once been asked to leave. But now people came up to shake his hand, thank him, and share stories of their own. Scout sat proudly at his feet, wearing a little tag that said, "Service Dog, Family." Jack arrived a little later, smiling at the sight. "You did good, Mark," he said as he sat down beside him. Mark looked around at the happy faces, the clinking coffee cups, and the smell of pancakes filling the air. "No, Jack," he said softly. "We did good." Outside, a local news van pulled up. A reporter stepped out and asked if she could talk to Mark. He agreed, though he was never one for attention. When the camera rolled, the reporter asked, "Mr. Delaney, how does it feel seeing what this diner has become after everything that happened?" Mark took a deep breath before answering. "It feels right," he said. "What happened before hurt, yes. But sometimes pain opens the door to something better. This isn't just about me. It's about reminding people that kindness doesn't cost anything, and respect shouldn't be optional." The reporter smiled. "And what would you say to others who might face similar situations?" Mark looked directly into the camera. "Stand tall, stay calm, and never stop believing that good people will always show up, even if it takes a little time." That clip aired on local news and was shared thousands of times online. People from across the country sent messages to the diner, thanking them for turning a mistake into a message of hope. Over the next few months, Sonny's Diner became a special place, not just for veterans, but for anyone who believed in second chances. The walls were filled with photos of smiling faces, newspaper clippings, and thank you letters from soldiers who had eaten there. Every first Sunday of the month, the Veterans Breakfast Day brought the whole town together. Even the same manager who had once made the mistake became one of the biggest supporters. He volunteered his time during the events, always making sure every guest felt welcome. For Mark, life felt full again. He never sought fame and he never wanted attention. All he wanted was a simple meal and a bit of peace, but instead, He helped start something that brought hundreds of people together. One evening, as he locked his truck and looked at the diner glowing softly under its neon sign, he felt a quiet satisfaction in his heart. He turned to Scout and said, "We did all right, didn't we, boy?" Scout wagged his tail, his brown eyes bright under the streetlight. Mark smiled and added, "Sometimes, it just takes one wrong moment to remind people what's right." And from that day on, every time he walked through those diner doors, people didn't just see a man with a cane and a dog. They saw a hero who taught an entire town what true respect means.